It is, of course, January 2019, which means we have hit the 50-year anniversary of Matt Busby announcing he would be retiring as Manchester United manager. Manchester United reigning European champions at the time, and very famously or infamously, within 5 short years, they were somehow playing in the old second division. We are joined on the line by Wayne Barton, who has chronicled a turbulent and infamous time in Manchester United history in his book, Too Good to Go Down. Wayne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So 50 years since Matt Busby sat up and said, "I'm done." Was there any great surprise when Busby retired in January 1969?
Yeah, I think it was a massive shock, as it would be. It was seismic for United. Those who probably knew Busby best might not have been shocked by it because the signs were there for a while, and it was very much the feeling that Wembley was the culmination of a journey rather than the start of another great team. And as he said in his announcement for the retirement, I think the headline was, "I've lost my grip," on the modern football players and the celebrity status that is nothing like it is today. But then it was George Best was the fifth Beatle, and it was a little bit different to what he was used to dealing with. And I think it was he just felt that the time was right to step aside and let a younger man. He thought it was a younger man's game at that time. However, I mean, like we said, I think Wembley '68 was the culmination rather than the start of the next great side.
We do predominantly want to talk to you about what happened over the next 5, 6, 7 years. But on Busby for a moment, is the general consensus amongst people who knew him and who were aware of how things were working that he was right, that he had not lost touch, but he felt himself he had to a degree lost touch? But did people generally feel it was the right time for him to go? I'm not quite sure how old he was at the time.
Yeah, I mean, he was younger than Sir Alex was when Sir Alex called it a day. But Busby was also tormented by Munich. He was much older than his years at that point, and he was ready. I mean, it was a miracle that he lasted as long as he did, to get them to Wembley and build that other great side. There was a school of thought that, he was becoming, I don't want to say the words because they sound horrible in the context of what we're talking about, but there was the idea that he was becoming a bit of a tactical dinosaur. There was some new kids on the block, Reevy, Clough. Ramsey had won the World Cup without wingers. There was a lot of innovation going on, and there was the idea that Busby was falling behind. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think football's cyclical, and I think that as we've seen with United, there's in the contemporary age, there's a certain idea about identity that should be adhered to as well. But I just think he'd sort of lost his interest a little bit once he'd won the biggest prize.
It prompted this amazing period then. Wilf McGuinness, Frank O'Farrell, and ultimately Tommy Dockerty. If we start with McGuinness, Busby's immediate replacement, he was 31 years of age. It was a shock all round that Wilf McGuinness was given the job. He knew a lot of the players. He'd had a playing career himself, but then through injury had got into coaching early on, and even he himself wasn't aware he was getting the job until relatively late in the day. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think United had quoted a couple of names before then as well. The idea that Jock Stein might have taken over. So I'm not sure how late in the process it was that Wilf became the front runner for the job. And again, it was a fairly revolutionary thing for United to have done at that point. Appoint from within, get someone of their own to sort of lead using the same principles. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for Wilf because, like you say, he was a player for the club, but he never reached the heights of a Best, a Lowe, or a Charlton, so it was difficult to get their respect, especially the ones we hadn't played alongside, such as a Dennis Law or an Alex Stepney, who had won the greatest prizes, and to try and get the same respect out of for Wilf that they did for Sir Matt would have been very difficult indeed, and that proved to be his undoing, really.
So I mean, he was no shrinking violet. He did attempt to impose himself on that dressing room.
Yeah, I mean, he tried what he could, but I mean, he would make an example out of, for example, Bobby Charlton, and if that didn't go well, in the example that's used in the book is a great story that's told by Willie Morgan, that Bobby wanted to go to a meeting down in London, and he attended. He got dressed after training, and he came back out in his suit, and he had his hands in his pockets, and apparently they weren't allowed to do that at training because he broke code or something. So Wilf made him do 10 press ups in the mud in the suit, which didn't go down well because it was Bobby Charlton. And there was another time Alex Stepney was dropped, and instead of talking to Wilf about it, he went straight to Busby because, as he still described Busby as the boss, and Busby sort of smoothed the waters to get Stepney back in the side, but the sort of damage was being done by that kind of act, really.
Yeah. The Bobby Charlton story highlights a fairly cack-handed approach.
I don't know about cack-handed. I just think it was one of those, perhaps an understandable thing that he tried to do to try and show people who were boss, but at that point, the results weren't great, and it was very difficult for him to exert his control when the results on the pitch weren't backing up his quality as a manager, so it very difficult for him to stamp that authority.
He was Busby's choice. What did Busby see in him, do you think?
I think it was that idea, the same kind of principles that Fergie said when Moyes was appointed, that sort of cut from the same cloth, and the idea that Busby, after he retired, he named it like a list of 5 or 6 criteria in the newspaper that United managers must have, and McGuinness sort of fit most of them apart from having the experience. So the idea was that because he knew the club, and I guess that was basically it, the idea that he knew so much about the club that he could keep it running like a well-oiled machine. But I think it was a novel idea, but it just didn't work.
Quite naturally, you can lay a lot of the blame for what happened at the doors of the various managers here, but we are talking about an ageing, if once great team, and that was a huge issue for all the managers to try and confront. And then you have George Best, the complications in his life are boiling away. There's a clip here I want to play, and it's in the documentary that was, I guess, you consulted on, and your book was a part of the BT Sport documentary, Too Good to Go Down. And it's Bobby Charlton speaking, it seems like on the night that Manchester United had been relegated, or certainly in the weeks afterwards in 1974, and his general sense of the malaise, as you'll hear, that set in even pre-68. Have a listen.
Who do you blame? I would think it stems from the fact that United were on top for so long that unless you're in the position to recognise it and recognise that you need change, that you're going to fail. And I'm afraid that's what happened with United. Fortunately, we won the European Cup in 1968. Everything since that seems to have been an anticlimax. But possibly Sir Matt Busby missed out and should have changed the team a lot. Possibly even prior to that. I think possibly for the past 3 or 4 years there's been lots of occasions when I could have been left out of the team, really. But maybe reputation swayed his decisions. I think it should have been changed a lot earlier than it has been now. But it's very sad, see the club going down, and I hope they do better.
Is there a general consensus on Busby's comments?
Yeah, that's the funny thing is about those comments from Bobby was that United hadn't been relegated. I think those comments were after his own retirement in '73.
Okay.
So he's speaking in a general sense about United's malaise, but I think that actually makes his comments actually stronger. They're more pertinent with that, because he's not speaking with the hindsight of they've been relegated. Obviously there are problems. So.
Right, that's amazing to hear, because the documentary starts with that interview, and it does look as if it's been given literally almost on Match of the Day on the night that they've been relegated, and they've said, well, let's get in Bobby Charlton. So I didn't realise how prescient actually he was being.
Yeah, and to be fair to himself as well, I mean, to say that he could have been dropped. However, the stories along the timeline of, it's all right, Charlton saying that with hindsight, and I don't want to speak ill of one of the greatest legends that's ever kicked a ball for the club. But there was he was a major player in the problems that United were having. In terms of the player power. I mean, Frank O'Farrell, Wilf's successor, dropped Bobby for a game, and Busby went to O'Farrell to tell him that he shouldn't drop Charlton, and it's funny to hear Charlton say that he could have been dropped, but then when it actually came to it, no footballer actually likes to be dropped, do they? So
no, it's true. So Frank O'Farrell, we're all familiar with. He's a Cork man. A number of the players in the documentary, well, they were unanimous in saying that he was a very good man, but a number felt he was quite lost or was dwarfed by the scale of the job. Talk to us about Frank O'Farrell's era.
Yeah, I think what happened was he hit the ground running. His first 6 months in charge were brilliant. It was I forgot the name of his assistant, Musgrove, came in and did a great job. They were the young thing in England. They'd come from Leicester City. They had a great reputation, and they breathed new life into these United players. Because they did have a reputation elsewhere, I think that the likes of Best and Charlton did buy into it at the start, and Dennis Law, I think they all thought, well, all right, we'll give him a chance. And for the first 5 or 6 months, they played as well as they had done at any point under Busby. The football was absolutely incredible. But the problem was, like you said earlier, they had a leaky defence, an ageing defence as well, and the games that they were winning, scoring 4 goals, 5 goals, but they were conceding 2 or 3 goals every game nearly. And then when that sort of turnaround came, where the attacking goals didn't come quite so often, and they were still shipping goals, that was the first sticky period for O'Farrell, naturally. But at that point, he hadn't made a change yet, and I think he couldn't believe how well it had gone. But then he hadn't been as prescient as we were saying Charlton was earlier. He hadn't been as prescient with that. He thought that it might carry on for the rest of the season. And by the time he started making changes, it was really too late to turn around the general form of the side. And he brought in some great players, don't get me wrong, Martin Buchan needed time to adapt, and he couldn't stem that ship all by himself, especially when he was that first signing brought in by O'Farrell. So, the players who were so successful, naturally a little bit hesitant to get used to this new leader of the centre of defence as well. So after Christmas, it sort of fell by the wayside.
Yeah. So they finished 8th in Farrell's first season, the second half of the season a disaster, and then ultimately Christmas 1972 he was sacked, with United 3rd from bottom. O'Farrell can count himself very unlucky in that it was around that period that George Best became unmanageable. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the summer, his first summer in charge, well, his only summer in charge really at the club, the pre-season was dominated by Best. Best had gone off and he had to convince him to come back. And I don't even think it was a case of O'Farrell desperately trying to convince him, but it was more on Best's whim that, I'm going to come back now. I didn't really want to quit. I had sort of said that to get away from the press speculation. Because he'd grown disinterested by United's, by his own admission, by the way. I'm not doing him a disservice with that. Best had grown disinterested by United's loss of form, because Dennis Law was struggling with a knee injury. Bobby Charlton was one of the older heads now, and there was a lot of responsibility on Best's shoulders, and he wasn't interested when United was struggling. So that left O'Farrell with a massive problem, obviously, because he had to start thinking about how he was going to replace these players. I'm sure he had the idea. Obviously, he brought in Ian Storey-Moore as a like-for-like for George Best, but then Best came back, and you can't drop a George Best. You can't kick him out of the club, but he became a massive problem for O'Farrell.
We can probably deduce a lot about this period in Manchester United history by the advice that Tommy Dockerty says Frank O'Farrell gave him upon replacing Frank O'Farrell. They had played together at Preston, so they were on relatively good terms, even though Tommy Dockerty, then the Scotland manager, leaving the Scottish job to take the Manchester United job. And he said that the advice Frank O'Farrell gave him was, just beware of Busby and beware of some of the players. Dennis Law, Paddy Crerand in particular, Willie Morgan. If they're not in the team, they'll stir up trouble for you. So we'll come on to the players in a moment. Beware of Busby. I think a lot of us from this distance do wonder what kind of presence Busby was after he retired. Was he toxic? Was he inadvertently toxic? Was he absolutely fine?
I think toxic's the wrong word, but I know what you're saying. I don't disagree with the principle of it, because I think
I'll change it to unhelpful.
Yeah, but it was more like he thought he was being helpful. So because he was that go between, because he was when he left, or when he sort of retired, he became the general manager of the club. So he was effectively an administration manager, but he wasn't really. The players still saw him around the place. He was still the boss. So they went above his head to Wilf, from Wilf to Busby, and that never changed with O'Farrell. And it was more difficult for O'Farrell. Obviously, McGuinness would acquiesce to that because Busby was his superior for so many years, and he would never speak ill of him, whereas it was a lot more jarring for O'Farrell, who thought he would have more control over these kind of matters. But the players were still going above his head to Busby. Busby was very loyal to a lot of these players who'd been with him on this very emotional journey. They'd won him this prize that had become his life's mission, really, and he couldn't stand to go against them. So effectively, he was trying to smooth the waters over, but created more harm than good, unwittingly. He wasn't meaning to do it. Unfortunately, that was the problem that he caused, because in every act of involvement, he was undermining the manager, whether he liked it or not, because the players were only going to him if they wanted to undermine O'Farrell.
So Frank O'Farrell also mentioned some of the players, if they're left out of the team, they're going to stir up trouble, like Dennis Law, who ultimately Tommy Dockerty got rid of. Law was having injections in his knee. He was rarely fit at that stage. So these were really difficult players to manage, it seemed, at that time in their careers.
Possibly. I mean, you've got the idea that these experienced players who are coming to the end with egos that match that, they could be quite difficult to manage. Having spoke to Dennis for the documentary, and the idea of him getting, the injections in the knees, from his point of view, he was doing more harm to his body than good in terms of wanting to come back and wanting to fight through the pain to help a struggle inside. However, when it translates into poor performances on the pitch and the fact that he wasn't training regularly, it does come across as a selfish pursuit. Although it wasn't that, he was doing that for the good of the side. There are well documented problems that Dockerty had with many of those players, such as Willie Morgan and Paddy Crerand, who was retired by that point. I'm not sure how many problems O'Farrell had with those. I think his major problems were with Charlton and Best, and perhaps Stepney as well. There was a few of those senior players. Crerand, maybe because he ended Crerand's career, but then you have and we are talking about a tumultuous period in United history, but these are also football problems that happen at every single club. It's not like O'Farrell unwittingly rocked the boat more than any other manager. Every manager has to be a responsible for ending players' careers at clubs, and they're never going to be popular when they do that.
As I mentioned, Dockerty was the Scottish manager, and he was given the Manchester United job. He is a force of nature, and even in the documentary, he's in his 90s now, or just turned 90. He's still got his full head of hair, and he's still, we'll get on to his sacking ultimately, but he's unhappy about that. He is still spiky, I would say. So he was definitely spiky in his day.
Yeah, very on it. He's got his side, which he's entitled to, and that differs from a lot of the players' opinions. But as Paddy Barclay says in the film, and he said it perfectly, that every decision that Dockerty took was for the benefit of Manchester United. And like I was saying with O'Farrell, particularly O'Farrell could have done it, but he wasn't allowed to because he was sacked. Dockerty was then given that responsibility of clearing out those players and starting afresh. So he was never going to be completely popular because there were some massive names that he had to get rid of. And they did it in such a quick turnaround as well, which is, that's pretty crazy to think of, the speed in which Charlton, Law and Best all left the club. Yeah,
difficult players to replace. And George Best came back. It seems Matt Busby maybe interfering again, tempted Best back, and that didn't last very long, and he went off the rails again very, very quickly. And in 1974, the unthinkable happens and Manchester United are relegated. A part of this story, I have to confess, anytime I watch documentaries about this period, it tends to end with the Dennis Law goal. That's kind of got it. What a fall from grace, and Dennis Law relegated Manchester United. Now, Dennis Law is at pains to point out that actually Birmingham against Norwich relegated Manchester United, although we all point to his goal. And then It's the rebuilding that Tommy Dockerty does, which is quite impressive. Straight back up out of the old second division, and very, very quickly they win the 77 Cup final against Liverpool. The average age of the side is 24 years of age. They finished third in the first division. There is a sense by 1977, 96, 97, 76, 77, that Manchester United are back, that Dockerty has done a fairly extraordinary rebuilding job, and the team is young, and they are all set to kick on before the most unpredictable of things happens.
Yeah, I mean, you can have different opinions of that because it's a lost potential thing, isn't it? Much in the same way that we talk about the lost potential of the 58 side who sadly perished and what they could have gone on to achieve. Obviously, it's not on the same level of that whatsoever, but it is, when we look at the direct comparison, the 96 United side, which beat Liverpool in the FA Cup final, had exactly the same average age as that one in 77. Right. So we know what they went on to achieve. And obviously that 77 side was broken up fairly swiftly after, well, some of the major components of that side were taken out. Yeah, they could have gone on to better, especially when you look at Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa and what they went on to achieve in the following years. It's not just a matter of saying, oh, United had to beat this behemoth in Liverpool. There are some second division sides who were down there with United who went and won European Cups. So there's a very strong argument to say that United could have ended that wait for a league title or even a European Cup much sooner than what they did have to wait. But we'll never know. And to be fair, I think Dockerty he's still in a stage of his rebuilding job. You know, there's 2 or 3 more players to add to that side, certainly, before they could say that they were likely contenders.
The end for Dockerty comes, I mean, it's pretty famous, I think, at this stage. He fell in love with Mary Brown, who happened to be the wife of the Manchester United physio and one of Dockerty's real allies, Laurie Brown. And a 2-year affair surfaced, and Manchester United took the decision to sack Dockerty. In the documentary, he certainly feels it was the wrong decision. He says he's amazed at the decision that a matrimonial thing could affect his position. I hadn't realised actually that he married Mary Brown, Tommy Dockerty, and they're still together. So it proved to be a lifelong love affair. But that was the end, the most bizarre of circumstances. Matt Busby, according to Martin Edwards, was pretty moralistic about the whole thing in his view as to what should happen to Dockerty when it surfaced. Yeah,
I think so. I don't think Busby's was the defining vote, so to speak. I think at that point, I don't think they wanted to sack him. I think that was the last option. But when it came down to it, there was the idea that obviously this affair had been going on for a long time, and the crux of the matter is one of them would have to lose their job, either Dockerty or the physio, and you can't sack the physio for that. That would have been completely the wrong thing to do, and they had to sack Dockerty. I mean, I've grown very fond of Tommy. This isn't the only project I've worked on with him. He's helped me with numerous books in the past, and I'm the first and foremost advocate of how good that side could have been and what a great job he did do, and how highly he should be commended for the work that he did do. I just can't see a way that he could have carried on, really, in the job that he had, because it would have been difficult for the players to have respected him after that as well.
An extraordinary couple of years, and it all kicked off this month 50 years ago with Matt Busby announcing his retirement. Wayne Barton, author of Too Good to Go Down. Thanks so much for chatting to us, Wayne.
Thank you.